And on behalf of the Indian Psychiatry School Mental Health Speciality section, I'm very, very happy to have this program here today. Of course, with me is Dr. Sagar Lavanya, who's part of our section, Dr. Narasimha Reddy, and Dr. Dhananjay Chaudhary, who also joined us for this event. But I'm your host for the evening. And I think before we start the interview, we're very privileged to have our three main office bearers of the Indian Psychiatric Society, our president, Dr. N.N. Raju, our secretary, Dr. Arbinda Brahma, and our treasurer, Dr. Aleem Siddiqui. So I would request Raju sir to start proceedings by just saying a few words about the event, and of course, whatever you'd like to say about Dr. Chawda, and then Arbinda and Aleem, and then we will begin proceedings. Yeah. So. Raju sir, could we please have you say a few words?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sorry that I'm somewhere in Siliguri, so my connection is not so good. But anyway, matter of pleasure that the school mental health and the school mental health is organizing this webinar. And in fact, we at Indian Psychiatric Society consider this as one of the most important sections for imparting or disseminating the knowledge of mental health among the students, identifying the problems, and also finding out the solutions. And thankfully, we have very good personalities in this section. I mean, Dr. Avinash, Dr. Narasimha Reddy, and the rest of the people are doing, I think, have been doing an excellent work from the beginning. And that is what I thought. They are the experts in this field, and they can give us a direction to Indian Psychiatric Society to formulate a few maybe guidelines or formulate methodologies where that can be adopted all across the country. This is what I want. I mean, request them to bring out either maybe a small booklet or a white in some document to see to it that we publish. I think Indian Psychiatric Society can publish a booklet or something like that, so that we will have some document to show that Indian Psychiatric Society has some, maybe you can call it guidelines or you can call it anything. That is, I think, any name you give it. But we request, I think, you all to work on this and to see to it that some document is produced from your section, at least by maybe another 3-4 months time. Work on that, especially work on the I think webinars which we have been conducting as the same material. If it can be converted into a book form and publish that, I think that would be great. So again, it's a matter of great pleasure to see that we have Dr. Kirsi Chawda, who is known to be what would I say, the most enlightened speaker in the country, speaking to us. I think that would be a great moment for every one of us to listen to him. He is quite a decorative speaker, quite an electrifying the audience, and also make us sit as long as he wants us to sit. So that is the quality which he has, and I'm sure today he is going to speak, I think, eloquently as he always does. And as I think that will be moderated by Dr. Avinash today. So with, I think he is also chairing the session, and Dr. Sagar Lavanya, I think in fact, he promised me a physical meeting. Hopefully, I think we expect some, maybe I don't know. The days are very crowded. I'm not very sure whether we can get that. But still, I think it's a great beginning and great going with another resourceful person, Dr. Dhananjay Chaudhary, also being in the team. I'm sure two great days ahead for you all. So I wish this program a grand success, and also I will see how best I think we can utilize this, and looking forward to some very useful inputs for Indian Psychiatric Society. That is what we want from each section. Not only I mean, just organizing a webinar or a meeting or a physical meeting, at least bring out something which gives us direction to Indians. After all, Indian Psychiatric Society is driven by your thoughts, driven by, I think, the inputs from experts. Like each section, they give us the inputs and expertise comments to us so that we can put forward to wherever it is required. Once again, I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and wish this program a grand success. Thank you so much, Avinash, and rest of the people.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Arbinda, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Avinash, my dear friend and the chairperson of School Mental Health Specialty section of IPS. Basically, this particular section is, they have a very fantastic team. Dr. Avinash as chairperson, Dr. Shagar as convener, and Dr. Dhananjay as EC coordinator, and above all, Dr. Narsimha Reddy as advisor. So we know already Avinash, Dr. Kesri, they are doing a good work in the school and college mental health programs for last few years for IPS. So today also we can expect a very interesting session because Avinash will talk to Dr. Kesri. And I think this is particularly important, keeping in mind the, this COVID pandemic situation. Now schools are opening again. So the students are facing lots of problems, parents are also facing some problem, teachers are also facing problem. So I think today Dr. Kirsi will address all these issues, and it will be a very interesting session for all of us.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arbinda. Thank you. Alim, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Avinash. Thanks for inviting me. My regards to IPS President, Dr. N. Raju, and all the office bearers, Indian Psychiatric Society, and to the team of Dr. Avinash, Dr. Sagar, Dr. Dhananjay, and Dr. Narsimha Reddy, sir. Regards to you, I think school mental health is special because if you want to change a society, you have to start from the school. And when you start from school, this generation, when it evolves, they will be a different human being and they will drive the society. So whatever you guys are doing is extremely important because you are in a way shaping the society. What to say about Dr. Kersi Chawda, one of the most articulate, handsome and cute psychiatrist, I'd say. Very good friend. Whenever you are feeling low, you can talk to Dr. Kersi and you can feel better. I'd like to request all the participants here to invite this team to their cities, to their places. This team that you are seeing today will have a super interview, no doubt. Try to replicate this locally in your places. That will be a good boon to the society and IPS in general. So that is all I'd like to say. Back to you, Avinash.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And without further ado, I will start proceedings. And everyone has already done their bit in introducing Dr. Chawda, but I have just three things to say about him. One is that I've been working with him for, I think, over the past 10 or 15 years, and it's been an immensely pleasurable experience working with him, learning from him. He, of course, has been a friend, an advisor, a senior colleague, always been there to help me in school mental health whenever I've needed help, even personally. And yes, my punchline when someone asks me to always introduce him, I always say that men like Dr. Kersi Chawda have been crafted by the gods in their finest hours. So that is why, he's here. And so sir, to start with our interview for today, those of you who may have questions that you want to ask him, please only type in the chat box. No unmuting yourselves, and I will take up whatever questions we feel we can. So you've been in the field of school mental health, I think, right from 1983, 84, 85, as you've been telling me. And it's been a journey of over 30 years plus now. So what I would like to know, of course, is tell us something about this journey. How did it begin? How did you reach there? And how it sort of went ahead? And where are you heading from here? Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to say thank you to all the guys who said such nice things about me. I don't know if I really deserve it, but it's still very sweet to hear all of these things. So we had this young callow youth around 83, around 1982, 83, who finished his postgrad and was looking around, always had an interest in child and adolescents, and found himself so incredibly under-equipped to deal with kids. I mean, all postgrads will know, as you just come out of college, that the bad world is very, very different from our little cocooned college environment. It just so happened that I was offered to become actually a school counselor in one of the convent schools in Bombay. And technically, very, very few psychiatrists become counselors in schools. I mean, Avinash has done a couple of them. He's still a counselor in some of the schools. But otherwise, it's normally something that a psychiatrist would not do. But I figured that I'd start off with it. And, you know, while I was preparing for this, I mean, I was just thinking of what all I could talk about during this interview. And I made a list of the places that I've been a counselor with. And I just discovered, to my own amazement, that I've actually been a counselor in 5 normal schools, or so-called normal schools, and 5 special schools. So that's a lot of counseling that I must have done. The poor kids have had a lot of me. We've had children. Okay, so it started off basically with, I remember the first time that I went into the school, and I was chatting with kids, and it just so happened coincidentally that my mom used to be a teacher in that school. She left and she retired and so on, and then I joined after that. It was a little amazing in that when you're sitting and chatting with a kid and he's in the 8th standard and he starts off by saying something to the effect that, doc, I've come to you for help. And I say, okay, what? And there's this 13-year-old kid in the 8th standard and he says, there's this girls' school opposite our school. And I like a girl in that school, but she's in the 9th and she thinks I'm too young. What do you think? And that was baptism by fire. We keep talking about sexuality in kids and we keep talking about relationships and stuff like that. But that was really my first brush, as it were, with what kids were talking about. And as it went on, I kind of got involved with other schools dealing with the so-called normal child. I got into schools dealing with the severely intellectually difference, or the mentally retarded kid. I was very, very privileged to start with the first so-called school dealing with appropriate learning, which only dealt with the learning disabilities. At that time, we had no learning disabilities. And we were so very lucky in that when we started off with that, somebody high up in the political sphere in Maharashtra had a nephew who was learning disabled. So we kept pushing and we kept trying to get concessions, and I'm so thrilled that they were just passed through. So at my time, the first group which started off getting concessions with learning disabilities, I was part of the psychiatry team. And in the 9th and the 10th, we managed to push, in the 10th first, we managed to push through some concession, and then it went to the 9th. And then of course, now we have it going the way it is. I've dealt with kids dealing with, mentally retarded. We've dealt with kids which had a workshop for the mentally retarded and they did fantastic work. What are the things that actually come to mind? I was kind of figuring out what were the things that made a tremendous made a tremendous impact on my mind. I remember many, many years ago, I was very blithely, as all of us youngsters do who don't really have that much experience, very blithely telling a parent who had a mentally retarded girl, she must have been about 20, about behavior modification techniques and what she should do to make her become more independent. And I remember her looking at me straight in the eye and saying, Doc, it's all very well to say what you're saying, but do you realize that I'm never, ever going to be in a position where I can even expect that I can leave my girl alone so that she can go across the road to the grocer and pick up a loaf of bread and come back. She was severely mentally retarded. Do you realize that it is heartbreaking to know that I can never ever expect her to get married? Sometimes in our little blith worlds where we are very happy and content and we have the so-called intellectual and cognitive tools where we tell people what they're supposed to do, we kind of forget a little bit of humanity, and that's something that I learned. I remember the first time I had a parent who came in to me. She was the daughter of a very, very famous person. I mean, she was the wife of a very, very famous personality. And she came into my school and she was talking to me and she burst into tears and said, the other day I walked into my bedroom and my husband, I could hear him tell my little girl, don't tell mummy what we've done. And my little girl was without clothes on the bed. What does that mean, doctor? I remember there was this time when I spent half an hour telling a physically abusive parent, a man who used to beat up his son for no reason at all, almost no reason at all. Your work is not complete, your work is not neat, you haven't brushed your teeth properly, and he would whack him and whack him and whack him. And I spoke about physical abuse and how it should not be done. And about a month later, he walked in and he said, you'll be so proud of me. And I said, what, you haven't hit him? He said, yeah, I haven't hit him, but I've only kicked him. You really realize the nuances of parents. You realize the nuances of behaviors that are absolutely shocking. And when it comes out of actual reality, then you realize that school mental health is so very important. Alim spoke about the fact that this is where, I mean, whether we like it or not, we have a huge mental health problem. And we all know that mental health is going to affect anything from 1 in 4 to 1 in 6 people, whether it's a child or an adult is immaterial. India has a huge population. We have a huge child population. We have a huge adult population. If we are looking at the millions of kids who are in school, and we're talking about schools who are very, you know, I mean, they're in, I mean, I'm in a metro, so we're talking about metro schools. We're talking about schools who have some amount of privilege. We're talking about students who have maybe more than one first learner parent, first generation learning parent, so that there's some evidence of some support being provided at school. And yet we are looking at kids who have such a huge problem. We're looking at kids, first of all, who might have intellectual issues. We're looking at parents who've never really been parents in the past and may have been grown up in abusive societies. So the only kind of fulcrum, the only kind of balance that the kids might have is actually the support that they might get in the school from a counselor or a unit. Because over a period of time, I was very privileged, very lucky to work with schools where there was actually a unit that was set up, which might have included an occupational therapist, a psychologist, a counselor. I was there. Occasionally, we used a speech therapist. And these made all the difference in the world. What are the positive things we looked at? I mean, I've spoken about so much of negativity. I remember that one very, very enlightened priest who was heading one of the schools in which I was a counselor, in which I acted as a school counselor, suggested to me, because he had heard about the fact and he had people who had gone abroad and trained, and he says, can't we do something at a lower level for getting kids with possible learning disabilities? We just do a screening right at the nursery and the KG. So for 2 years, every kid in the pre-nursery and nursery actually underwent 1 hour of occupational therapy twice a week. And I think it made a lot of difference. I mean, we didn't really do a test to find out whether it did, but I do believe it made a lot of difference. In fact, when the kids went up higher and when we were looking at attention deficit and things like that, we found a significant, or what it seemed like significant, reduction in the inattention and the hyperactivity that we would otherwise normally see in kids at a higher level. I remember a parent slinking into my room and I said, yes, do you need help? And he says, yeah, I think I do. Because my son, who's in the 9th standard, came up to me and said, Doc, Dad, this doc is a good guy. You need help. Why don't you go and speak to him? What is mental health all about? What is mental school and health all about? First of all, of course, we've got to look at the fact that we're not only looking at mental illnesses, so that is a very, very important issue. We are also trying to see our kids actualizing their potential. Because it's only when our kids actualize their potential that we are going to be the superpower that all of us talk that we should be. It's only when we look at kids' mental health that we're looking at it in a holistic way, so that you'll also find that in addition to the physicality, which is so very important, and hopefully the physicality gets better and better as nutritional status improves, as vaccination becomes more penetrative, as good nutrition and good exercise and stuff like that happens, we find our kids becoming taller, stronger, etc., etc. Hopefully that will be reality. But if you're looking at mental health, and mental health is so very important and so very neglected, it's only actually come up into the forefront over the last 10 or 15 years. Before that, though they had mental health programs, and you're supposed to have state mental health programs, not very, very much was done. And if it was done piecemeal. So I'm thrilled to bits that now we have, I mean, the government might have done a lot of silly things, but one of the great things they did was make a recommendation that all schools should have counseling services. And I do know that there are a lot of counseling services in schools, because I get a lot of schools calling me up and saying, can you recommend a counselor for us? We keep talking of the elite. I'm thrilled to bits that there's so much work happening with the BMC schools as well. Now I'm in Bombay. There's so much of work happening in BMC schools. I'm part of a program which is called the Life. And one of the things that we do is called the Laughing Schools Project, where every year we are dealing with kids starting at the 4th standard level and the 8th standard level. And we are talking about things like bullying in schools and sexuality and discipline and a little bit of attentional and behavioral issues. So there's a lot of stuff happening. Maybe it's happening in piecemeal, but it's still much, much more organized than what used to be so many years ago. And the future, the sky is the limit. Avinash.
Well, thank you, sir, for that entire insight. I think, there are two questions which I'm going to come to now, which I think every school counselor, and I think you and I have also faced in our lives. The first thing is that, do you think compared to, I remember when I started school work, maybe in 2001-2, you started it, of course, 15, 16 years prior to that. The acceptance wasn't as much. And I'm sure it would have been far worse when you started it. So, what do you think has brought about the change in acceptance in the minds of parents? Like today, I don't see parents upset at the fact that, my child is sent to the school psychiatrist. But in 2001, they would be very upset that why was the child referred? So what do you think has brought about that change?
Well, I think one of the things, of course, is that there's so much more awareness of the problem. And the more people talk about it, the more it's going to become fairly acceptable. So when you have people talking about attention deficit disorder, when you have media bringing in issues related to child and behavior, it seems to help. I remember in my time, we used to do a lot of talks in the classroom. So we actually had something, the equivalent of what we used to call a 0 hour at that time. So once a week or maybe once in 15 days, we were permitted, because we got to remember it's a school, academics very important, and everybody's rushing against time to finish curriculum and stuff like that. But we were still privileged to have something like a 0 hour. And I remember going into the 10th standard kids and talking about death and talking about one parent families and talking about alcoholism in the family and talking about sexual abuse and, that good touch, bad touch stuff. And almost invariably, Avinash, at the end of the session or after a day or two, somebody from that class would come up to me and talk about their own personal issues. I've also, whenever we are doing mental health, we also have regular talks to teachers, because after all, teachers are the guys who are really going to be privileged enough to have the kids with them for most of the day. They are also extremely stressed out at what they're seeing. And it's all very well for me to give them behavioral techniques when you have attention deficit kids. But if you have 6 or 7 attention deficit hyperactive kids in a class of about 50 or 60, and they're running around and there's chaos in class, it can get very trying for them. And you've got to remember that teachers also have their own families to look after and their own financial issues and their own physical issues and their own family issues. So whenever we had a program going on, even for the teachers, I remember teachers would come in and say, I think after what I've heard, that I remember a teacher coming in and crying and saying, I think my brother has a psychotic problem because of what I've just heard you say in terms of the symptoms. I remember somebody else, and this was horrendous. We had a person who was in the field, and she adopted a girl, and that girl landed up having a problem, intellectual. And the next thing I heard, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks after I had first seen that child, and she had gone to 2-3 other doctors, and maybe something happened, and the mother committed suicide, and she was in our field. We take things so lightly. Somehow the professionals become a little blasé. And I keep telling them I keep telling the youngsters who are with me that it's nice to be matter of fact and to be, in a sense, sometimes even blunt. And maybe you have to tell a parent that he's never going to get okay, but say it in a way that is as nice as it can be. You don't have to push the parent's nose into the mud. It's not doing anything. And then I have these people saying, oh, but I'm very blunt, I'm very honest. No, you're not blunt and honest. You're being rude, and you're being disrespectful, and you're being unkind. And you don't need to. You can still convey what you have to convey nicely. You don't have to convey it in a way that makes the other person feel terrible.
Right. I think, sir, a question which I think every school counselor who's attending this program probably faces is that we always have that one, you'll always see those few kids who need help so badly, but the parents somehow just say, I don't want my kid to receive any help, whether it is at a school level or whether it is at a personal level. And my kid doesn't have a problem, point blank. They don't want to accept anything now. And we very often, over the years, I know I have spoken to you about this on numerous occasions, and you said we have to just at times accept, that they are not our children and let them go. And though we want to do so much, we can't do. But so my issue is, what would you, advise school counselors when they are faced with these kind of issues where a parent is totally against any help? The child himself knows or herself knows she has a problem, but can't do anything because the parents don't want to support her. So what should be our role as school mental health professionals?
So as school mental health professionals, we have to understand our limitations. We are not the parents. Now, of course, POXO has come out. So in that, if there is sexual abuse, and whether the parent likes it or not, we are going to do what we have to do for POXO. But besides that, I might believe that the kid is severely learning disabled, for example. I might believe that the kid has severe attention deficit disorder. And I know that if I prescribe some medication, there's going to be a remarkable change. I will suggest it. I will plead with them. Sometimes I just tell them, give me 1.5 months of your kid's life where I put him on medication. And if there's any side effect, because Dr. Google should be banned and is not, but if there's any side effect, we will deal with it. You can stop the medication. And you still sometimes have parents who say no. What has happened, which gives me a little hope, even though it's not as good as it could be, is there are a lot of kids whose parents say in the 5th or 6th or 7th have said, no, we're not going to do so. And they come up to me in the 8th and the 9th and they say, okay, maybe we'll give it a try. And you feel like smacking them across the face, but you can't do that. And you give the medication. And then they usually, it's not that medicine or whatever else therapy you're doing, occupational, etc., is a panacea for everything, but it's certainly known to help. And research has proved that it's very, very effective in a huge number of kids. So then the parents come up to you and say, I wish we had listened to you in the past. And you say, yeah, I wish you had. But anyway, it's okay. I'm glad you're accepting it. There is still a certain percentage of people who just say no. I remember in my hospital, we had a kid who was admitted because she had got out of a balcony and jumped. And when she jumped, for whatever reason, there was a awning. She didn't realize there was an awning below her flat, and she managed to break her fall. She fell off the awning and she broke her leg. So she was admitted in our hospital with a broken leg. And obviously, you don't just break a leg like that. So the kid was referred to me. And when I remember walking in and I was speaking to the parents and I said, is there any reason that you can think of why she was so stressed that she actually did what she did and she tried to kill herself? And the mother looked at me straight in the eye and said, but she didn't kill herself. She didn't want to kill herself. She took a wrong turn in the night. Instead of going towards the bathroom, she went out of the window. The very few times, Avinash, that I've been flabbergasted, this is one of the few times. So there is denial. Of course, there is denial. There's always this feeling of if I don't address it, it'll go away. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. We're all frustrated. We all get angry. We all get upset. Unfortunately, we have our limitations. So I tell everybody, try the best that you can. And I know that I used to go back home, and when the parent would say no, no, no to everything, I would be brooding for a few hours, and my wife would get irritated with me and say, just stop it now. You can't go on like this. So over a period of time, you learned to disconnect. It still breaks your heart. It still breaks your heart when you know that it's going to make a difference. When you've had over and over experiences where you know that if you do what you're supposed to do, I mean, what the professionals tell you to do, which is not Dr. Google. Dr. Google's not a professional, and I'm going to be talking about him quite often. If you do what you're supposed to do and go to a good professional who seems to know what he's talking about and take his advice, the chances that you will get some improvement is very high. I mean, nobody is God. Nobody's even suggesting we are God. But what do we do? So we just accept, and you go home and you bash up a pillow and you have an extra drink in order to get over the the anger that you're experiencing. But we accept the fact that a parent has the right to act like an absolute, unadulterated idiot.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, I think we both again have, while we've had parents who have not been cooperative, I think we've had a fair share of principals who have also not been, cooperative at times with regard to school mental health. They've always felt that, okay, I mean, they've called us in for a lecture to their school, but the moment we tell them have a counselor or they'll say, no, we don't have so many problems in our school. And, and they label someone as autism, being naughty, and they'll not want to consider it as autism. I mean, all sorts of things happening.
Yeah.
Now, the thing here is that, I mean, and parents who come to us in our clinics very often would, complain about such teachers and principals and say that, we know the child needs help, we accept, we come to you, but the school is not supportive. Now, what should be our role there? I mean, we often call up and try and speak to the principal, but it doesn't always work out in the way we want. So, over the years, what has been your strategies or experiences that have helped?
Right. So it can be in two ways. Sometimes principal is good, the teachers are horrendous, in which case we speak to the principal. And I have been blessed with working with absolutely fantastic principals by and large. There have been an occasional person who may not have been as fantastic as we'd have liked him to be. And he might have said stuff like, oh, you lazy fellow, you're on anti-epileptic medication. That doesn't mean that you have the right to feel so sleepy. I know you're just making this up. Stand in a corner. I mean, we've actually had stuff like that, which fortunately, these incidents are becoming less and less as more and more people and more principals are becoming aware of the fact that mental health is a big thing, and the kids don't do stuff just because they don't like our face. They do it because there's a problem. But the other stuff that you're talking about, this used to be very, very prevalent right in the beginning, and especially related to things like learning disabilities, where everybody didn't know it, where people didn't know enough about it. And they just felt that the kid was misbehaving, and we were making him weak, because in our time we would just get a slap and the kid would start spelling again and the kid would start writing again. We survived it. We kept telling them that that wasn't true. We would try to explain to them the nuances, the biological inferences, and so on and so forth. What actually made a difference was government resolutions. So if you have a copy of the government resolution and you send it to the principal, and you say that if you don't follow what the government resolution says, after all the tests are done and after all the summary and the results are available, then you're actually going against the law. If you're going against the law, you're committing a crime. Are you committing a crime? And I've done this to a couple of principals, and there has been a reluctant climb down, and they said, no, okay, we don't agree, but what to do? We'll have to follow what you're saying, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes we have to do that, and it does work. But Avinash, as I'm sure you're also realizing, over these years, it's become much, much, much easier. We have principals who go all out. I mean, I've like I said, I've worked with principals where they've just gone all out and said, what can I do to help this child? What is happening to make a difference? What can we do to make a difference so that the kid is happy and cheerful, and we can deal with the academics as well. So this is something that we actually are seeing much more of, and hopefully it will continue to happen. There are times also where I know parents have threatened to go to the media, and all schools and all of us also would not really like for the media to mention a particular school and say this principal did this or this teacher did this. So there's a climb down then again, so that seems to help. So it's either explanation or GR or media which does make a difference.
Yeah. Well, sir, I would like to, you to just look back and probably talk about, I mean, we all know that there are routine workshops that we've done in schools, like there's anger management, there's bullying, now we do so much of social media related workshops.
Right.
But I would want to know, maybe 2 or 3 very unique or different workshops that you've done, which probably, you've done only maybe once or twice, but because a need arose, or it was something, so you could highlight those things over here.
Well, I did one about 3 weeks ago, which was incredible because I've never done it before. And that's, I mean, I've done a huge number over 35 years. So for me, not to have ever done something like this before was a great one for me, right? So the school principal called me and said, we want you to talk about the ethics of education for kids post-COVID. Because she said what we realized, of course, is that our kids who were getting 50s and 60s pre-COVID, suddenly during COVID were getting 90s and 100.
Correct.
So they've suddenly got brain transplants and we are so thrilled about it, but we'd like them to be ethically okay also. And that was wonderful. And to add excitement to the thing, they had kids of the 9th and the 10th who were sitting in the back, and the parents of the 9th and the 10th were sitting in front in the same auditorium. So I had to actually speak to both. It was wonderful. It was incredible. I loved it. So that was one. Another very, very nice and comparatively unique one was something related to what can I do to make life better for my friends? Okay. We keep talking about the buddy system and things like that. Everybody knows about the buddy system. If you have somebody who's not doing very well or having a physical handicap or a mental handicap, you kind of appoint somebody in the class or more than one person in the class who becomes like a mentor or a helper or a buddy system. And we decided to do that for every child. So the general thing in that session was, what can I do to make life better for my other friends? Not for me. Not what am I going to do to make myself feel better, but what am I going to do to make the other person feel better? I think it was quite insightful for the kids. Now, let me say, I just love to talk about this example. In one of the schools, okay, now I'm only attached to one school and as a counselor, and I'm so thrilled and proud of it. And I will also add that I'm so thrilled and proud that Avinash's kid in the same school. So the poor guy has no choice but to be good to me, because otherwise I threaten the kid and I'll say, I'll call your parents on. So one more year, Avinash, one more year. Yeah. Anyway, in that same school, we have a whole bunch of differently abled kids. And it's part of the school ethos that every year, something like 15 to 20% of the admissions are kind of reserved for kids who have known problems. We're not talking about kids who we find have maybe a learning disability or something else happening as they pass up through school, but when they're admitted, we know it. And that has included kids in a wheelchair, that has included kids who are hearing impaired and so on. And I remember there was this hearing impaired child.
Even visually impaired, we've had one
visually impaired. Yeah. But this hearing impaired thing, I love telling people, because when I'm asked by other people, tell us something that really made you feel good in the schools that you worked at. So this hearing impaired kid was, he passed up, bright kid, absolutely bright kid. He was allowed a computer, he was allowed, the mentors were with him, and so on and so forth. And when you come up to the 9th standard, you become a head boy and head girl. So you're in the higher classes in the 10th. So you are supposed to give a talk to the rest of the school. This guy decided to stand for head boy for house prefect. So when the other kids who are also standing for prefectship were talking about what they're going to do for the school and how proud they are and what plans they have, etc., etc. When it was this guy's turn, he actually distributed typewritten papers to every kid who was there. He must have had about 100 of them. And he kind of, mimicked what he was saying, pointing to each word. He got a standing ovation and he won. He became the prefect or whatever it is of that school. About 10, 15 years later, his kid, he got into the same school. And it was so lovely. The kid was, as she grew older, kind of telling her dad things that the teachers were telling him. It was so beautiful. It was so lovely. Our kids are great people. You were talking about the visually impaired child, and I just remembered. I remember going into a classroom and I was just observing them because I'm a very naughty child, very naughty kids in the class. And the principal told me, go observe that and see what you can do to get the bullying down, etc., etc. And this visually impaired child was walking through the rows. Now, when kids are sitting there, sometimes their bags are put on the floor if they don't fit into the desk. So very naturally, nobody had to tell them anything. But as the kid was walking through those rows, I was observing that if there was a bag which was jutting out, the kid next to the bag jutting out would just quietly pick it up so that the kid would walk through unimpaired and not fall and stumble. They didn't have to be told that. They didn't have, the kid who was walking through, who was visually impaired, wasn't told, be careful, there are bags there. He just went through. It was just taken for granted that he would be looked after and supported by his peers. And I think that is such an important aspect of mental health. Avinash, you know that as we grow older, especially during COVID, one of the things that has helped us the most is the connectedness that we get. We've set up COVID helplines and stuff like that. And you had these old people who sometimes were living alone and, they would have family in different parts of the city or in another state, and they would have helpers. And suddenly these helpers were not there and the family was not there because there was no transport. And what could you do? We had people, youngsters in school and college, who would actually go if they were staying in the same class, staying in the same building, and who would go and just talk to them, keep a distance so that they were not carriers of the infection. But it is this connectedness that makes a difference. And I do not believe connectedness suddenly is a chamatkar which happens sometime. I believe connectedness occurs when you are kind of reinforced about being close and about looking after your not so privileged friends and not so privileged colleagues. When that happens, we see the difference that we should be seeing in society. We keep talking. Today when I open out a newspaper, my heart sinks when I read about what kids are doing to each other at times. Fortunately, we're not yet the American way where the kids are going around shooting each other. I shudder to think of what would happen if guns were available here. But we're still seeing so much of negativity amongst kids, youngsters doing things which they should not be doing. But at the other side, we also see so much of positivity. And no kid is born being a criminal, and maybe there's some genetic thing, etc., etc. But by and large, we do believe that if good mental health practices will make a difference, especially if started at the school situation. And if he doesn't have an adequate role model at home, maybe having a good role model in school, a teacher, a counselor, an OTist, just a friend will make all the difference in his life.
Right. Well, sir, two things before. I would want people in the audience, if you have any questions, you could type them out in the chat box. I have taken up a few that came. We have probably our last 10 or 12 minutes of this talk left. So I have two questions, which since we're on the entire happiness page, we're going to go into something else, wherein, generally when I have been, say, stuck with a school mental health issue, or I feel I want to just double check whether I've done something right or wrong, I have invariably given you a call and we've discussed it and things, and you've given me a perspective. And we, of course, take each other's perspectives when we need things. And other of people in our circle, like Dr. Alka or Dr. Henal, and they're attending this program. Dr. Dipti Shah is here. So all these things. But my whole premise here is, when you started off, if you were ever stuck, who were your mentors at that stage? I would say between the 1980s and 2000s when we were not there in the picture? I mean, I would love to know that. I've never asked you that ever before, so I should just,
Yeah. So some of my batchmates, I had batchmates. There was a Cherian Verghese who's in America right now. I would call him up and talk to him. We had people in some of my seniors. Avinash, I've actually even spoken to your dad about a couple of things, and
Okay.
He's given me a very, very different perspective, and that was lovely. I don't know if Jay Shastri is.
He's
on
here.
this.
He's attending. He's
He's
attending. Yes.
attending. I've
Yeah.
spoken to Dr. Shastri, and he's given me fantastic perspectives. He's very sweet. He was
Yeah.
always very sweet. So I was very, very privileged to have these seniors. Some of my own batchmates also, most of them have gone abroad, and a lot of them didn't actually get into child. So I do believe that there's a slightly different perspective when you're dealing with kids and adolescents, because otherwise you tend to look at it in a slightly different way. But these were the guys who I would talk to, and I think it made a lot of difference. Just incidentally,
yeah.
I also trained under an American child psychotherapist.
Okay.
And there were a lot of times when, even though he went back to America, I would just write to him and he would write back to me saying, look at it in this perspective. That seemed to make a difference as well.
Right. Another thing, I mean, this is on a more serious note. I mean, we've had so much of positivity in all the work that we've done, but yes, we've also had some shades of, I wouldn't use the word regrets, I wouldn't use the word negativity, but I mean, I would say we've had some failures which have been above and beyond our control. It's not been our failures, it's been more. So, I would want you to, I mean, there's so many young people who are attending this, and I mean, we've stumbled, fallen, got up so many times. So I want to, you to probably just give them some insight about, if you could probably not highlight, but mention maybe 2 or 3 times where, I would say, despite all that we've done, I mean, things haven't worked out, and how you've, I mean, of course, you already mentioned how do we manage feeling bad about it, but in general, some examples of, if
of how I cope with what happened.
No, but I mean, just some examples of, I mean, a few. Well, I would
Bad
say,
things,
a few, or when you look back, you think, it could have been different. We always say, you hota to kya hota, it would have been different. Yeah.
Okay, so one, of course, was that professional who killed herself.
Correct.
That is something that I keep thinking about. I mean,
correct.
I mean, fortunately, or I mean, it doesn't really matter. But she met 3, 4, 5 people after she met me, and something had got triggered off, and she committed suicide. And the frightening thing was that she was a person who had actually trained to teach kids who had a similar issue that her kid had. So that is something that just kind of broke my heart. I had another kid, I remember dealing with him, and he was very, very, he was extremely anxious, some amount of depression. We dealt with him, put him on medication. He became a little older. Then he went abroad. He started doing stuff over there. And about 2 or 3 years after that, his parents, I lost touch. His dad called me and told me he had committed suicide in America. And I keep thinking, should I have done something else? Could I have done something else? Well, when he was with me and when he was here with me for those 3 years, he was doing very well. He had got into one of the best colleges in America, etc., etc. And I kept telling him, please be in touch. Please stop. If you can't be in touch with me, find somebody local. Don't stop medication. Be under supervision. And of course, nobody does that, right? So when you don't do that, and then you'll end up having an issue, it becomes a problem. One of the worst cases that I've dealt with, of course, is child sex abuse. And it still affects me. I mean, after so many years, and sometimes when you get 3, 4, 5 in a row, and I also have a lot of youngsters who can't deal with child sex abuse. I think it's one of the most horrendous things. It makes you wonder whether humanity still exists. So when you're dealing with 4 or 5 or 6 horrible child sexual abuse cases, it really gets at you. I remember, in fact, there was something that many, many years ago, before POXO came in, etc., I discovered that somebody who had actually knew somebody who I considered to be a very nice guy was sexually molesting his niece. And it just cracked me up. I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't deal with it. I remember somebody telling me, and then that person actually told me, Doc, I think you should cancel your next few appointments because you won't be able to deal with it. And I had to do that. Those things, you start wondering, what is it that you have missed out on? What is it that you could have done differently? then of course you realize that you try to do the best that you can. And if you have a fairly good percentage of kind of success, 80, 90%, and you don't do well with the 10, it's better than the other way around.
Correct.
We still want for 100%. I mean, eventually, if I go to a doctor, I want him to cure me. I want him to make me feel better. Sometimes it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And you keep wondering, should I have done something different? I use all my colleagues. I've used you so often. I've used my dear friends, some of whom are in this city and some of whom are out of this city. I use them all the time when I'm stuck. I get tremendous help and support and succor, for which I'm always grateful. I try to help out people who call me and talk about problems. Not only you, but there have been a lot of youngsters who call me. They've asked me about what they should talk about, how they should talk, what they should do when a kid comes up with a problem, and we try to help each other most, because I do believe that we have to share our experiences. That's the only way we will progress.
Right. Well, sir, another thing that I also wanted to, mention was that, I mean, this is a question asked by the audience that, in schools that you attended, I mean, we all worked, but what do you think is the approximate percentage of mental health problems, in an average school?
I would say something like anything. See, it all depends on what you're looking at.
Correct.
If you're looking at learning disabilities and attention deficit disorders as part of the same thing, then you're looking at 12 to 15% of the population, maybe even more. If you're looking at the so-called psychiatric illnesses, anxiety, depression, OCDs has jumped up crazily. We're looking at addictions. We're looking at suicide, which has become such a horrendous thing in the higher classes. Suddenly post-COVID, for example, and I've even put it in some of our psychiatric groups where we talk, I'm getting a horrendous amount of girls who are cutting themselves. And sometimes they actually say there are 3 or 4 people in my class and they're cutting themselves and I'm not good enough. And you're looking at them and you're saying, you're topping your class, you're extremely attractive, you speak so well, you're a great raconteur, you're one of the best sportsmen in your school, and you're not good enough. So we're suddenly seeing a lot of this deliberate self-harm and so on and so forth. And this becomes a very, very major issue. I'm also seeing a lot of stuff now happening, and I think a question has just come out, so I will talk about it before we end, related to the LGBTQ community. Avinash, we have done a lot of work when we were part of the same team along with Amrit Pata Joshi, and I think we've done a lot of good work. I'm sure you're seeing, and I'm seeing in the schools, and I'm seeing in a lot of kids who are coming to me privately, the anguish that they experience when they discover that their sexuality is not the so-called norm. And people laugh at them, there's bullying happening. Even the teachers who are supportive sometimes really don't know what to say, how to say it. Principals sometimes are not very good, and so on and so forth. There is an absolute need for having talks and awareness related to this. People are, of course, much, much more aware than what they were. But the difference is, now, for example, I'm a Parsi, you know that. People laugh at Parsis, they poke fun at Parsis, but it's a gentle kind of laughter. It's like you're laughing with us. If I'm talking, when we make jokes about the LGBT community, it's vicious, it's disgusting. And then you say, oh, but I was just making a joke. No, you weren't making a joke. You were being disgusting. So that is what we are looking at. That is what we need to change. We need to include everybody. We are becoming much, much better now. Now when we go, I mean, I remember going to a nightclub about a few years ago. And in the nightclub, there was a guy on a wheelchair and he was dancing in the wheelchair. And I thought that was fantastic. We've got kids who have crutches and they are all over the place. I've seen kids who've obviously been in the autistic spectrum disorder, and they're in restaurants and they're screaming and shouting, and their parents very calmly deal with them. And I think that's fantastic. You still have an occasional parent looking at them and muttering under the breath and saying, how dare they become here and they're spoiling our mood. But I think it's necessary for all of us to be aware of the fact that we are privileged if we don't have kids with issues. And just because you have a kid with an issue, the kid is still a kid. The kid still needs to experience everything that a kid without an issue should experience. That includes going to a restaurant. And if he's going to pick up a curry bowl and throw it on your head, so be it. Deal with it. What were we talking about?
No, so this is no, exactly. Now, what I also wanted to know is in the light of the post-pandemic, this is a question that's come in the chat box. We've forced children to go online. We've forced children to have gadgets, and it's been there because of the online schooling. Now, and now parents come to us post-pandemic and talk about increased screen time, which we didn't really worry about because it was online school. And so in what context do we consider it pathological or not?
Yeah. So we consider it to be pathological if the only thing the kid is doing is getting onto the screen, if he's not really interacting with people, if physical play and things like that no longer seems to be of interest. And technically, if what he's doing is impinging in his social, occupational relationship kind of situation, I think it's absolutely essential for us to be aware of the fact that life is different today. Now, when I was a kid, for example, I used to be a voracious reader. So the only punishment my mom would give me is threaten to take away my books. Was that an obsessive reader? Was that pathological? I don't think so, because it was considered to be good. The kids today are doing almost the same thing. They're doing things related to, on the line, and they're reading stuff and all of that. Now, it can be a problem. We certainly have a lot of cyberbullying happening. We have a lot of sexual grooming which takes place, which is very frightening. Our kids believe they have the answers to everything, but they're still naive and innocent as we were when we were their age. But we accepted much more of what our parents said. Today, parents are finding it difficult to get the kids to accept what they're saying, etc., etc. So it's certainly something that could be pathological. I have had experiences with kids who spend 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours on the phone. I've had kids who have gone abroad to study who've been sent back because they're very strict. They haven't done enough credits. They haven't attended class. And when you ask them what happened, they said we were just playing games and things like that. So it certainly can be pathological. But every kid who spends time on the screen more than what you would like is not necessarily having a pathological mental illness. But we've got to guard against it, certainly.
Okay. So before we sort of end this session, I mean, the last segment of my interview is a rapid fire with you.
Ooh,
so yeah, so this is something you're not prepared for, but
I was not prepared for anything.
Yes. So the thing is, the whole thing is, I want your answers very briefly and
without thinking too much.
Yeah, without thinking too much. And do you think child mental health problems have increased post-pandemic? Yes, no.
Post-pandemic, yes.
And what about, I mean, do you think what's more common now? Behavioral addictions, aggression, or both?
Probably both.
Do you think every school has to be sensitized with regard to gender dysphoria and LGBTQ plus issues?
Very big yes.
Sex education, different for different genders or both genders in the same room?
Both genders in the same room.
What about teachers who, I mean, group therapy for children with similar problems in school? A big
very
yes
useful.
Or no?
Very yes. Useful, very big yes.
Should young psychiatrists look towards school mental health as a career option? Because we need more of them.
Very much.
Yeah. And lastly, but not the least, what draws you to school mental health? The children, the parents, the school environment?
I think it's the kids.
Yes.
I do think it's the kids. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our interview with Dr. K.C. Chawda. I would like to request my the other members of our specialty section. Dr. Narasimha Reddy sir is here from Vizag, and Dr. Sagar Lavanya from Agra. So Reddy sir, your few words before we end the program.
So good evening to both of you, sir. I think we had an excellent session now. It's a very enlightening answers from Dr. K.C. Chawda we had, and you also had a very good discussion with him. I just want to have one clarification. Sometimes, children, especially in the middle school or high school stages, they try to have their own personal problems getting revealed to only the psychiatrist, and specifically ask us not to reveal it to their parents. This sometimes happens. What type of precaution we are supposed to take during that times? Because child being the minor, shall we have to inform the parents?
Yes, sir.
Or yes,
Sir, I would normally, I look at it in this perspective. I would not break confidence unless there is something that is dangerous either to the child or to somebody else. So if the child says he's going to kill himself or he's hurting himself, I would certainly call up the parents. If the child says he's going to hurt somebody else, I would certainly call up the parents. If the child tells me he's having, or maybe if he's having drugs or something, I might call up the parents. But otherwise, by and large, I may not.
yes. Most of the times it happens with drug abuse also. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
So then I would probably suggest it.
Okay, sir. Sir, I think we
Yeah.
all know that SMHP is in place. I mean, mental health program, school mental health program is in work from the time of NMHP in 1982. It has already been 40 years past. So where are we now in India? What is the implementation level and how far we have reached and what best can be done as a part of this school mental health program in India, sir?
I think the WHO actually came out in the year 1995, I believe, talking about the world. They came out with this world program for dealing with school mental health. India has been a signatory to it, and they're trying to do it in piecemeal. Some states are much more effective than others, but now I think everybody is moving towards it. So there are a huge number of articles which are found in all our journals related to school mental health and what has been done, what they have found useful, what they have not found useful. Almost always for the lower middle class and the economically backward, they found that, for example, kids who were given a midday school program tended to be more even receptive towards mental health, because at one time, if you didn't have enough to eat, you didn't care about aggression and things like that. You start getting enough to eat, and then you start bothering about things to actualize your own potential. So I think the midday mental health program, which is one of the best things that has ever happened actually to school mental health. So even though it's a physical thing, it has affected school mental health. There's a lot of other stuff also happening, sir. Like I said, Maharashtra, where I belong, lots of stuff has happened in mental health. And I'm thrilled to bits that in the BMC schools, we are doing in one of our groups and one of our organizations, we are doing a lot of work. Most commissioners of the BMC are very, very open to mental health now because they're seeing the stuff that is happening. I know that, for example, during the COVID time, I was asked by the then government to have a group, to have a talk along with a psychologist and an educator to the kids of the 10th standard BMC schools, because they had decided to scrap the 10th. And it was a very, very big thing for them. So we had a big talk and it was nice. It was attended, etc., etc. So people are now getting aware of it. Governments are getting involved in it. I think the future is fairly bright.
Lastly,
Yeah.
sir. So what best can be done from our IPS side? What best can be done from our IPS side as far as this school mental health program is concerned?
Sir, I think we need to set about sensitizing everybody. I mean, we talk about sensitization of a lot of things, geriatrics and LGBTQ and biological psychiatry and all of that. I do believe, I think Alim, one of the other people who started off, talked about the fact that it is so much that is important in terms of sensitizing our kids to what mental health is all about, so that hopefully as they grow up, we won't be inundated with the mental health illnesses that we are seeing. All of us know that the younger the child is caught or the younger the person is caught and the earlier the treatment that is made, the more the chances of full recovery, the more the chances are that he won't even reach the kind of pinnacle of illnesses that we would otherwise see. So I do believe that if the IPS somehow can, through its huge network of psychiatrists, spend some time every month, every year, dealing with some kids, dealing with some schools and talking. I mean, I know a lot of our people are already doing it because I'm in touch with so many of them. And if we make that into some kind of a magic mantra, it might just work. We would then get a huge number of schools who would know what mental health is all about. And hopefully, because we are also sensitizing teachers. So if teachers get sensitized towards what they should look for and then they start referring, I think we'll be in a very, very good state.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Reddy. I'll just ask Sagar Lavanya if he's here. If Sagar wants to
Yeah.
say anything, Sagar, yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Regards to IPS office bearers, and big congratulations to Avinash, and thank you very much, Dr. Kursi. I always wanted to catch you first, but I think the Avinash was faster. Maybe that is because of the geographical proximity that he has.
That's true.
And I always wanted to hear you, because you are not only a theoretical thing is different, but you are very practical in your approach. Now I've heard you a couple of times and I'm always very much impressed. And yes, Raju sir, we will have some physical conference, physical meeting regarding school mental health, and we are planning for it in the coming winter session. I have a question that I wanted to ask, and this is a very practical question. We almost couple of years back, we had a conference in Mathura, and Dr. Amrit Joshi was there, and he started talking about sex. And with all the people in the audience, from the teachers, from the Hindi medium school and all, they were not very much comfortable hearing about all these things. And when we asked a question about sex, like if some girl has come to you and asked about what is masturbation and how will you go about it, then all of the teachers were very uncomfortable. So how to make that initial push with these teachers from a rural background to talk about these sensitive issues? This is a question that I want to ask.
Yes, sir. I would actually go ahead and just say that you just start talking about it. The first time they're going to be very, very uncomfortable. The second time they'll be less uncomfortable. The fifth time they will be more accepting. We don't have any other way. Just go on and on and on and on. That is why I keep saying it has to be a continuous process. So what might have happened in the past is that, you know, schools would just call in, say, a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a special educator, and they'd have one program every 6 months. That's not good enough. You need something happening every week. You need something happening every 10 days. You need something all the time, so that it becomes a useful, and it is a great way of then getting our kids to understand what mental health is all about. Sir, in Sagar Saab, I'm just going to say one more thing. I worked with a school for very severely mentally retarded kids, and we had to teach girls menstruation, because there were a lot of cases happening where the kids didn't know what was happening and they were being used by people. One of the things that we actually did was to get not life size, but very lifelike mannequin dolls, which actually had, you know, you could take off their clothes and you could show them something that looked like the genitals. We took the permission of the parents before that, and this we have to do. And maybe because I'm in Bombay and people are much more open, every parent said, yes, it was a very good idea. So there was a lady psychologist and we both, and this we did separately for the girls and separately for the boys, unlike what I would normally do for others, where we actually showed kids what menstruation is all about in terms of whatever the level that they could understand. I think it was fantastic. Quite frankly, I was also fumbling a bit over there because I was not absolutely certain what I was doing. I mean, we all learn on the job, but it was terrific. And then that became a routine, and it was done over and over and over again for all the kids who came into that school. Now, I don't know if it really made a difference to them in terms of the molestation. I do know that those kids became better informed as to what was happening to their bodies. And I think that is so very important for us.
Yeah.
Point well taken, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of today's session, and it's been a fantastic evening. Well, I also want to thank Dr. Alka, Dr. Henal, Dipti, Dr. Jay Shastri, Dr. Ritvik Chatterjee, of course, our very own Bernard and Rukshan are also here from Beacon High. So big thank you for them for coming over.
I think Mrs. Jamali is also.
Yes, and Mr. Jamali here, our principal. Thank you so much for being here and, you know, boosting our morale. So Sapna is here from Hinduja, so nice to have her. So
Sood is also here.
Yes, Sheena is also there. So many
also
people who work with us are here, so we're very happy for that. But I just want to say one thing on behalf of the Indian Psychiatric Society School Mental Health Task Force, that any one of you needs us, Satyen is here from Punjab, so anyone who needs us anywhere, any place, I mean, we'll be very happy to come. we do this very often, even on our own. We travel on our own, we stay on our own, we come, we do this because we like to do it. So please let us know. We'll be more than happy to be part of any school related program anywhere in India you'd like us to be. And that's, I think, the take home message. It's been a wonderful evening. I think good evening to all of you. Have a great evening further on. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.